I saw the farmhouse from the gravel road at a little past 3 p.m., a square two-story box with white paint scabbed by weather and a red roof that held on out of habit. The fields on both sides were cut stubble, no fresh tracks, no smoke, no movement. I stopped the cart behind a windbreak of maples and watched the yard through a pair of scratched binoculars until my hands settled enough to keep them steady. A porch swing hung crooked. One upstairs curtain shifted a little from air moving through gaps, not from anyone standing there. I listened with my ear against the wind. No distant engines, no carried voices, just dry leaves knocking along the drive. It would do for the night if I could make it safe enough. I left the cart hidden, kept the pack, and walked the fence line toward the back lot where the barn sat in a square of weeds. I counted windows and doors and told myself the order I would clear them in, room by room, no hurrying, no shortcuts. The back door was a mudroom entrance with a steel latch the sun had baked dull. I pushed it with the heel of my hand and it stuck, swollen from rain. The window beside it had a single pane cracked at the corner. I slid the pry bar into the frame and worked it slow. The wood gave a little and then more. When the latch finally slipped, I caught it with my palm so it would not slap metal. The smell inside was sour soap, old onions, dust, and that dry rot scent old houses keep in their walls. I set the pack just inside, kept the pry bar up, and called out in a low voice once. No answer. I waited a full minute, counting down in my head while watching the doorways. Then I moved. The kitchen was straight ahead. Chipped sink under a window, a hand pump mounted beside the faucet, a coil of hose on a nail. A calendar near the fridge stopped on April months ago, with a square around a date and the word vet scribbled there. A child's drawing of a brown cow with long lashes was stuck to the freezer with a magnet shaped like a corn cob. I stepped around a broken coffee mug on the floor, crushed oatmeal flakes under my boot, and checked the pantry with the pry bar first, then my eyes. Mice droppings on the shelf lip. 2 jars of green beans gone cloudy that I did not trust. A box of salt. 4 candles stuck to a plate by their own wax. I pocketed the salt and the candles and moved on. Living room. Couch with a blanket console of the same pattern every farm store sells. Television blank. Family photos turned toward the wall as if someone had swept them aside in a hurry. I crouched and checked under the furniture, then the closet, then behind the drapes with a fingertip first. No one here. The stairs creaked under my weight. I put my foot near the wall to reduce the noise and took each step slow. At the top, I kept low and checked each bedroom. A double bed with a quilt, a dresser with a hairbrush, a small room with sports trophies, a smaller one with a tiny bed, and a line of stuffed animals in a row. A bathroom with a bucket in the tub and a stack of cut rags. The attic hatch had a string hanging. I tugged the string a hand's width and sniffed. Hot wood and dust. No animal stink. I left the hatch as it was and backed down the stairs. I closed the mudroom door, slid the bolt, and checked how it met the frame. The screws were short. I swapped 2 of them with longer ones from a bin under the sink and added a second top screw, drilling a pilot hole with the hand bit I carry for jobs just like this. At the front, I propped a chair under the knob and looped a cord from a bucket handle to the brass mail slot and down to 2 empty jars so they would rattle if the door moved. At the kitchen window, I tied fishing line around a spoon and hung it from the sash latch, the other end knotted to 2 nails in the jamb. I do not trust a lock unless it makes noise for me when someone breaks it. I looked for water next. The hand pump at the sink had a leather cup. I primed it with a little of what I carried and worked the handle until the leather swelled. The pump coughed air and then produced a thick stream that cleared to cold with a grit smell and a hint of iron. I took a sip and held it on my tongue long enough to taste if anything was wrong. It tasted like many wells have tasted since the first towns were dug. I filled 2 bottles and a pot and washed my hands with soap that smelled of fake citrus. The soap smell carried, so I rinsed till it faded and then opened the window for a minute to let the kitchen air out. The barn stood 50 yards behind the house, wood gray, big doors sagging, one smaller door on the side with a sheet of metal wired over the bottom. The silo next to it had a rust stripe down one side, and little weeds sprouting in the joint at the pad. I walked to the side door and listened. Something moved inside, the kind of shifting that belongs to small animals, not a person and not one of the infected. I waited. The rustle stopped. I eased the door. Dust motes hung in the dark beams from a broken skylight, and the smell in there was old hay and oil and old manure gone dry. A swallow flapped up from a nest and skittered against the rafters until it found the open place again. Tools, a row of garden handles without heads, a splitting wedge, a sledge with a cracked handle, a bucket of bent nails, a coffee can full of screws, a coil of barbed wire, 2 rat traps. I took the screws and the traps and a short section of wire. A feed bag with something left in it gave off a stale, sweet smell. There were mouse tunnels in it. I left it. In a tack room off the main bay, I found a kerosene lantern with a blackened chimney and a quart of fuel. I shook the can. It was still liquid, not gelled. I took it too. On the far wall, a small fuse box sat with the lever off. The generator corner had a rectangle where one used to sit. Only the fuel line and the muffler remained, cut with a hacksaw by someone who knew what to take. I checked the loft ladder and climbed halfway, paused to look down through the slats, then went up to the landing. A cat blinked at me from a nest of wool blankets in a stall of hay bales. Its ears were thin. It did not run. I kept still and let it watch me. Nothing else moved. I came down and closed the side door with the wire tight around the latch. I walked the fence line that once kept cattle on one side and crops on the other. The fence wire was slack in places and taut in others. I hung 3 sets of little noisemakers in the hedgerow, soda can tabs on fishing line, a loop of chain linked to a coffee lid, and the loose blade of a handsaw set on 2 nails. I positioned them so wind would not set them off, only a body moving through. At the driveway, I dragged a fallen branch into a set of tire tracks and sprinkled loose gravel over the disturbed spot to hide it. I left the mailbox door open so I could see it from the kitchen window. If it closed or bounced, I would know the gate had been touched. Inside again, I picked a room to sleep in that had 1 door and 1 window and a good view of the yard, the small bedroom with the twin bed and blue blanket. I moved the bed against the door, not to stop it, but to make noise when it pushed. I unscrewed the closet door and leaned it against the window at an angle so it would fall if the glass was bumped. I laid my jacket over a chair back and set a line of nails on the carpet by the threshold, heads facing out so bare feet would notice. I kept food light, split a can of carrots, a small can of tuna, a handful of crackers. I ate standing at the kitchen counter and watched the yard. A crow landed on the clothesline and looked at me through the window. I looked back until it lost interest and hopped away. I boiled a kettle to scald the sink and poured the water down the drain to cover any food smell. Then, I wiped every surface I had touched with plain water and used the old dish towel hanging by the oven to dry it. The towel smelled of smoke from a long-ago meal. I risked a sweep of the upstairs for anything useful. In a closet, I found a long coat that could handle rain, a pair of wool socks that were not worn through, and a box with a few shotgun shells but no shotgun. In the bathroom cabinet, a first aid box with gauze, adhesive tape, alcohol pads. I replaced the items I used with old empty boxes in the same order, so a quick glance would not tell a stranger what had gone. I took a roll of fishing line from the sports room desk drawer. I found a paperback novel on the nightstand and left it face down so the spine would show the same crack if someone checked for prints. Habits like that keep me calm. Habits stop mistakes. As the afternoon leaned toward evening, the light softened and the farm lost edges. The wind dropped and the sweet smell from under the porch sharpened. Something had died down there long before I came. The scent rose and fell depending on how the air moved. I checked the crawlspace trap door but left it shut. I could bait it tomorrow if I stayed. For now, I wanted the house sealed. I used the cord I had to string a line around the second-floor landing railing and down the stairs so I could clip a small bell to it at night and pull the slack around my wrist when I slept. If the stairs moved, the bell would let me know before footsteps reached the top. I kept my pack half-packed and my shoes arranged to slide in fast. My handgun sat on the nightstand with 2 magazines beside it and a spare in my pocket. I wiped the oil from the slide so it would not smell in the still air. At sunset, I stepped out to the back steps, sat in the shadow, and listened. The fields carried sound in a clean way in the evening. I heard a distant coyote yip and then quiet. Something small moved in the weeds by the barn and settled again. Farther off, a branch snapped once. Not wind. I counted a slow 10 and heard nothing else. Then I went back in and shut the door. I did not lock it. Locked doors announce themselves when forced. A closed door that only sticks at the latch opens with half the noise. I allowed one lamp with the chimney trimmed and the wick low. The flame sat behind the stovetop reflector, so the light did not spill to the yard. I stacked 3 books on the windowsill to block the view from outside, and left a narrow gap for my eye. After full dark, I turned the lamp off and let my eyes adjust to the deep. The sky cleared and cast a faint glow on the fields, enough to tell movement from stillness. The first sound came from the driveway, a smart tap, then a drag. The mailbox door nudged and clicked. I held my breath out of habit and eased to the kitchen window with my ear close to the glass. Gravel shifted with slow weight. I pictured shoes scuffing, a body listing, arms heavy. Infected on that surface sound different from clean boots. The infected do not lift their feet. They do not correct for balance unless they catch themselves on something. I waited for the follow-up scuff. It came after a long pause. I felt the urge to peek and forced myself to stay still. Sound reveals more than a fast glance in darkness. The can tabs on the hedgerow wire clicked. The sound moved in an uneven line, then stopped, then clicked again. 1, maybe 2, drawn by the scent from under the porch or by some distant noise I had not noticed. The porch swing knocked the wall once. I closed my eyes and counted to 20. The swing knocked again, softer, and then not at all. I backed away from the window and returned to the small bedroom. I lay on the floor beside the bed rather than on it, and pulled the coat over me to cut the draft. I wrapped the bell line around my hand, not tight, just enough for a tug to reach my skin. I closed my eyes only when the house felt steady again. A different sound pulled me up. Not the bell, not the glass, the sharp metal bark of the side gate hinge, then a soft scratch against the siding near the mudroom. I slid on my shoes, picked up the handgun, and moved to the hall so I could hear both the front and back. A minute passed, then 2. The scratch returned, but lighter, a kind of testing. I pictured the cat from the loft. The infected do not scratch gently. I eased the mudroom door bolt up just enough to slip a finger to the edge of the curtain in the window. 2 yellow points hovered at knee height, then blinked. The cat mewed. I let the bolt drop, slid a small piece of jerky under the door crack, and waited with my face close to the floor. The tiny sound of a lick came through the gap. The cat ate in small, quick bites, and then the feet padded away into the yard. I closed my eyes and let my neck muscles relax 1 notch. It was nothing, and also something. Small life meant the yard had not been churned by a large group recently. The night stretched. I slept in snips and checked the window in between. At about 1 a.m., a bright flare lit the far ridge for a second, and then went out. Lightning with no thunder. Maybe a line down somewhere beyond the hill. The horizon pulsed once, much later, the color of a transformer flash. I hoped it did not draw company. I listened to the porch for a long time after that. At 4:30 a.m., a truck engine coughed on the road beyond the windbreak and then quieted. It never came up the drive. I pictured a man trying to nurse a battery or a carburetor that still needed a choke. The engine coughed again after a minute and then faded. No headlamps showed. I waited another hour before I moved. At first gray, I checked the yard with the binoculars from the upstairs window. 2 shapes lay by the hedgerow, both still. I did not go to them. I walked the interior, checked my noise lines, and found nothing tripped beyond the cans. I cooked oats with water and a pinch of salt, ate them at the sink, and felt the heat work into me from the inside out. I cleaned the pot and set it upside down to dry. I told myself I would spend the day making this place into something I could hold for 2 nights at least, maybe 3, if the road stayed quiet. Holding a place for more than a day means thinking about water, fire, line of sight, egress, waste, and the way sound travels. I made my list on an old envelope with a pencil and left it on the counter so I could revise it as I found more. Water was handled for now. Fire next. The chimney needed inspection. I went to the living room, opened the stove door, and found a bed of ash and a half-burned log. Creosote traced the inside of the flue in black scales. I took the poker, scraped a little, and saw flakes fall. The risk of smoke was higher than the benefit of heat in daylight. I decided to cook outside if I needed to, and save indoor fire for later if the weather turned. Line of sight. I trimmed 2 bushes that blocked the view of the back corner of the barn and dragged a metal lawn chair to a spot on the upstairs landing where I could watch across the field through a narrow gap. I used a hand mirror to study the porch without putting my head in the window. I practiced reaching the pack, the handgun, the shoes, and the bell line in the dark with my eyes closed. Egress. I tested the upstairs window over the porch roof. It stuck a little but moved with steady pressure. I laid a folded blanket on the sill to protect my ribs if I had to climb through fast. I checked the distance from the porch roof edge to the rain barrel and the rain barrel to the ground. Manageable. I left the upstairs window unlocked but closed. Waste. I set a bucket with a lid in the bathroom and added a handful of wood ash from the stove to the bottom. I carried the full bag from the kitchen trash out to the barn and sealed it in a metal feed can with a stone on top. No morsel smell would sit in the house if I could help it. Nothing draws stray dogs and raccoons faster than kitchen scraps. Nothing draws infected faster than the animals that come for those scraps. Sound. I tested each floorboard in the hall and marked the quiet ones with small squares of blue painter's tape I found in a drawer. When I needed to move at night, I would step only on those. I taped the glassware in the hutch so rims would not ring if the house shook. I patted one loose shutter with a folded towel. Then I took the lantern and the kerosene to the cellar to check shelves. The cellar door opened off the kitchen with 3 stone steps down. The air felt colder there, and it smelled of potatoes and earth. Shelves held empty canning jars with dust rings where others had once stood. On the bottom shelf, tucked behind a crate, I found 4 jars left full. 2 tomatoes, 1 applesauce, 1 pickled beets. All seals held. I lined them on the step and forced myself to leave one where it was. Never empty a shelf that belongs to someone else's careful hands. I left a note on the shelf in pencil. Safe water at pump. Took 3 jars. Left 1. If you come home, forgive me. I had no idea who would read it. I made the habit anyway. While I stood in the cellar, I heard the first voice since I arrived. It came thin through the window well. A man, not far, speaking to someone I could not see. "Gates open," he said. "House looks quiet." The hair on my arms prickled with the cold of the cellar, not fear. I turned the lantern off and capped the chimney with my palm to kill the glow, while gravel crunches moved toward the porch. I stepped back into the kitchen, crouched, and crawled across the floor to the hall so my head would not silhouette in the window. The man's boots hit the porch boards. Another person stood on the drive, footsteps lighter. "Check the barn," the man said. His voice carried a kind of hoarse authority that belongs to someone who has practiced sounding sure in front of a group. I slid the handgun into the back of my waistband and positioned myself behind the kitchen island so I could see the front door through the crack between cabinet and wall. My jaw moved without choosing to do it. A bite on air, once, then still. The bucket and jar line at the front door stayed quiet. That meant the person had not touched the knob. He tapped the mail slot with 2 fingers. The jars clinked softly because the line had some slack. His head turned. I imagined his eyes reading the dust on the floorboards, the scuff of my boot by the mat. He put his palm on the glass and left it there. The glass did not flex. He stepped back and walked toward the kitchen window. I slid lower until the counter hid me. He peered in, cupped his hands to his face. The interior would look like a dark room with a fridge shadow and a row of dull metal knives in a block. No movement. He stepped away and shouted, "Anyone in there?" I said nothing. I did not trust his tone. I did not trust his timing. I counted 3 windows out loud in my head, too quiet for anyone to hear, and moved to the back of the hall where I could bolt for the stairs if the door gave. The man waited a long moment, then turned and went off the porch. His boots jogged lightly across the yard toward the barn. The lighter steps from the driveway went the other way, toward the hedgerow. I waited a full minute, then crawled back to the mudroom and peered through the small curtain gap. No one was in the kitchen window's view. A soft bird call whistled from the hedgerow. A second later, the same whistle came from the barn. Signals. Not military sharp, but practiced. I noted it in my head and felt the outline of something I did not yet know. I edged to the living room and lifted a corner of the drape. The man stood by the barn doors with his ear to the wood. He had a rifle slung. The person by the hedgerow moved along the fence line in a crouch. Smaller frame. A woman with a ponytail. She checked my little can-tab line and stepped over it. Her face stayed flat. She had done this before. I could talk. I could wait. Talking before I understood them had more risk than waiting. I retreated to the stairs and went up 2 at a time on the taped boards, then waited with my ear close to the floor to read the house. The porch steps creaked. The woman came up this time and tried the door. The mail slot jars whispered. She paused, then knocked. "Sir," she said, voice level, not loud. "We're moving through. No claim. We saw the pump. We need water. We'll be gone in 10 minutes. We can leave trade." I breathed out once through my nose and let the shake leave my hands against the floorboards. I stood, moved to the top of the stairs, and spoke down. "Stay on the porch. Leave the trade on the step. Use the pump on the side spigot. No one comes in. If you put a foot in the house, I assume you want to fight." The words came out in a voice that did not belong to me before all this started. It belongs to me now. The man answered from the yard. "Fair. We do not want your house." He sounded surprised and slightly amused, which did not mean anything in itself. People react in odd ways when a body inside a dark house speaks from a stairwell. He added, "We'll leave something for the pump use." I watched them both from the upstairs corner window as they filled canteens. They kept their eyes pointed down or out, never toward the house. That restraint told me more than words. When they were done, he set a little bundle on the front step. A jar of peanut butter, half full. 3 short nails tied with twine that would fit hinges I knew, and a small brass key on a lanyard. He stepped back and lifted his hands once, palms out. Then they moved off down the drive and along the road with no rush. The windbreak swallowed them. I watched the drive until the mailbox door stilled. I did not step outside for another full hour. When I did, I took the bundle and returned inside. The key belonged to a padlock. The size matched the one hanging on the barn's big door. I turned it in my palm and rolled the lanyard around 2 fingers, then put it in my pocket with the peanut butter and the nails. I stood at the sink and drank twice, then rinsed the jar with well water, filled it, and left it beside the note in the cellar with another line. Strangers came, used the pump, left food and a key. No trouble. I try to leave layers one might read later, in case memory gets thin. With daylight full, I repaired what I could. I replaced 2 hinge screws on the back door with the nails wrapped in twine even though they were not perfect fits. I set 1 rat trap behind the stove and 1 behind the washing machine. I ran a line between the porch post and the railing so I could string a blanket as a screen if I needed an outdoor workspace in the rain. I pulled the fridge from the wall enough to grab a pencil that had rolled under. In a drawer, I found a dentist's mirror, the kind on a stick. It would be useful to see around corners without showing my face. Around noon, the wind shifted from the west and brought smoke. Not camp smoke. Utility smoke, plastic and wire, short and acrid. I marked the direction with my finger against the window frame and filed it away. The infected often drift with the wind when they catch a scent that reminds some broken part of the mind of kitchens and cars and crowded blocks. I did not want that drift to funnel them to the yard. I lowered the blanket at the porch and moved my work inside. I scanned the barn again in daylight. The padlock on the big door was rusted to its shackle, but the key the man left matched the brand. I tapped the lock gently with the back of the pry bar to knock scale away, slid the key in, worked it left, then right, and felt it move a fraction. I kept at it until the shackle gave. Inside, the space smelled less stale than the side room, as if someone had opened it not long before the world tilted. I found a hand truck, a bale hook, a coil of heavy rope, and a wall cabinet with the door wedged. Inside the cabinet, a row of mason jar lids, a pry opener, a package of matches sealed in a plastic bag. The matches would be precious when the alcohol pads ran out. Against one wall, a heavy trunk sat under a tarp. I lifted the tarp and unsnapped the trunk. Inside lay folded towels, a well-used wool blanket, a sealed tin of coffee, and a leather case. I opened the case and found a long glass thermometer, a sewing kit, and a hand crank radio with a broken antenna. The radio's crank still turned with resistance. I set it aside for later repair and closed the trunk. I keep a rule. Do not take the last blanket from a box that looks like someone planned it for bad times. I left the blanket and towels and took the sewing kit and the thermometer. The cat from the loft appeared at the barn door as if it had a schedule. Its tail flicked. I pulled a small strip of tuna from the can I had saved and set it down. The cat approached in silent steps and ate with small bites, never taking its eyes from me. When it finished, it licked its lips, made a little noise that could have been thanks or habit, and slipped back under a board. I do not trust animals to do anything but what they know, but that small routine put shape on the day. By mid-afternoon, clouds built up from the west. The sky turned a dirty blue and the air grew heavy. I set buckets under the eaves where the gutters drained so I could catch clean water off the first wash. I wiped the metal with an old towel to knock bird droppings off. The wind pushed a line of dust across the road. Far away, something thumped, a door blown shut or a roof piece falling. The wind tossed the clothesline once and left it alone. Rain arrived with big drops that smacked the porch floor, then tightened into a steady sound. I watched the driveway turn from a light gray to a deeper one, and saw my footprints fade. That gave me relief. Tracks draw curious walkers, and curious walkers draw worse. The rain filled the buckets and overflowed. I capped them and slid them under the porch. I closed the shutters on the west side and latched the rest. The first flash of evening came early because of the weather. Thunder rolled in a low stretch that made the window glass tremble against the putty. I stepped to the stove and counted between light and sound. The second flash came closer. The third was right on top of the last. A white blast beyond the maples. The power line that ran along the road ignited in a sharp glow and then died. I had not used any power, but the signal felt like a sign. I lowered the wick on the lantern and then doused it entirely. During the storm, the house creaked and shifted. Water tapped in the attic somewhere near the chimney. Not a steady leak, just one, then another, spaced wide apart. I took the dentist mirror and used it to check the hall corner without leaning into it. Nothing moved. I listened through the rain for any new rhythm. Boot on step, hand on siding, something thrown against the porch to test for presence. The rain masked all of it, which meant other sounds could hide in it. I kept my back to the wall and waited out the heaviest hour. When the rain eased, a new sound came. A soft thump from the barn loft, then a second thump, closer to the ladder. I pictured the cat, but the weight felt larger. I moved across the yard under the eaves cover and positioned myself at the side door. I listened with my ear close to the crack. A slow drag of a foot across straw answered. It could be an animal sheltering from the storm that had found a gap, or it could be less simple. I flicked the flashlight on for one breath and off again to preserve the dark edge. The beam showed the ladder and part of the loft rail. A shape pressed against the rail at the far end, and the rail creaked. I did not go inside. I backed away and closed the door. I looped the rope around the handles and tied a trucker's hitch with the loose end trapped under a nail head so the door would hold. I fetched a handbell from the kitchen drawer and hung it from the rope so any pressure would ring. I retreated to the porch, kept my hands still at my sides, and waited. The bell rang once, a single bright tone. Then silence. No shuffle followed. I stepped back to the house and waited longer. I slept in the small bedroom again, fully clothed, shoes ready, pack half closed, handgun where my hand fell when it dropped from the bed frame. The bell line over the stairs lay slack around my wrist. The night had that deep quiet after rain that makes small noises feel near. Once, at about 1 a.m., the bell line twitched and tinged so lightly I thought my fingers had made it. I waited and heard the cantabs on the hedgerow tick once far off. A small group moved along the fence, testing the wire. They did not come to the porch. I listened until the ticking drifted away. Morning came with light on the ceiling and the sound of a drip in the kitchen. I followed it to a small spot under the window frame where water had collected along the sill. I dried it with a towel and found the source, a cracked bead of caulk. I pressed the crack closed with a line of duct tape and taped a paper cup under the corner to catch any more. Then I stepped onto the porch and watched the yard. The ground gleamed, the air felt scrubbed, the driveway held only the shallow tracks from yesterday that the rain had softened. I debated moving on or holding a second night. Moving kept me unknown. Holding let me work and rest without the strain of travel. The pantry had enough for 2 more days at most if I rationed. The well made the place attractive. The barn troubled me with the loft noise. I decided to clear the loft in daylight, not at dusk, and then make the choice. I opened the side door, kept the handgun low at my thigh, and entered the barn. My nose read the space first. Straw, old urine that had dried, a faint sourness that suggested a bird had died in the rafters, no carrion blast. I positioned the hand truck under the ladder so I could knock it aside if I needed a barrier. I looked up and used the mirror to see the loft floor. The shape lay beneath a tarp near the back. A raccoon's mask peered from the edge at the noise. That explained the weight. I blew air through my lips once, not a laugh, not relief, just air moving. I climbed the ladder until my eyes cleared the floor and called out in a calm voice, "Go on." The raccoon watched me with round black eyes, smelled the tuna on my clothes, and then slipped through a gap to the outside. I checked the loft fully. There was no person, no sign of one, no boot scuffs, no new droppings that looked human, no moved bales. I returned to the ground and secured the side door again, but this time without the rope so the cat could come and go under the board. I could not defend every open line in the world. I could only reduce the big ones. By mid-morning, a figure appeared at the road, hands raised before I saw his face. He wore an orange cap faded to a pale rust and a jacket dark with water at the cuffs where it had not dried from the night. He stood at the gate and called in a clear voice, "I am not coming close. I want to ask a question, and then I will walk on." I walked to the porch and kept the post between us. His face was lined and his beard trimmed with a pocket knife, clean but uneven. He said, "Do you have a dog here? A black and white heeler with a spot over her eye?" I shook my head. "No dog." He nodded once, not surprised, as if he had been asking at every place he came to. "She ran when the barn at my sister's place burned. Wind drove the fire fast. I saw tracks down this road this morning and followed. If you see her, she answers to Lucy." "I will leave water out," I said. "If she comes, I will not keep her." He lifted a hand halfway in thanks and lowered it. "I have nothing to trade that you would want. I will not ask for anything. I will move on." "Use the pump if you need to," I answered. I watched him as he filled a bottle at the spigot, never stepping off the drive. He capped it and walked away, his back straight, his cap set square. When he reached the bend, he turned and looked once. I held his gaze for a count of 3. Then he disappeared beyond the maples. The house felt different after that. I do not pretend to understand why. Maybe the clear exchange reset the space after the night of signals and the roar of the storm. I worked again. I rewrapped the porch swing chains with cloth so metal would not knock wood. I taped the metal door latch where it hit the frame. I oiled a hinge on the mudroom. I reset the bell lines and added one more between the barn and the back steps, a thin wire strung low so a shin would find it. In the afternoon, I cleaned the hand crank radio and fitted a section of copper wire as a new antenna. The dial barely moved, but after 5 minutes of turning the handle, a murmur rose from the speaker. Not a clear voice, not music, only a murmur. Then a single strong tone, the kind a station sends to mark an hour or a test. The tone ceased and the murmur returned. I wrote the frequency number on the back of the radio with pencil and set it on the counter. I would try again at the top of the next hour. Keeping marks on paper helps when days blend. I cooked outside near the back steps at dusk, using a small can stove and the last of a fuel tab, because the air was still and smoke would hang under the roof if I cooked inside. The meal was simple. The rest of the tuna, a few spoonfuls of peanut butter and oats, and a halved beet from one of the jars, eaten cold. The beet juice stained my fingers. I wiped them on grass and then on the rag, then washed the rag with a little well water. The cat watched from the steps with slow blinks and a patient pose, and then turned away when I did not offer more. As the light faded, shapes on the field edge took on that gray indifference where small movements vanish and large movements announce themselves too late. The hedgerow line clicked twice. I returned to the small bedroom and looped the bell cord again. I thought through the plan if 10 came, if 5, if 2, if 1. I rehearsed the steps where I would not shoot at all, and the steps where I would, only if a body got through the door with its hands on the frame. I considered the stairfall, the second window, the porch roof, the run to the maples, the cart hidden there. I considered the field with its smooth ground and how noise travels across it. I committed to staying unless the house was breached. In the deep of night, the hedgerow line ticked 3 times in a row and then fell silent. The porch swing moved a thumb's width and stopped. The front jars chimed in the softest way, not the knock of a hand, more the tremble announced by a breath passing the mail slot. The sound of a shoe sliding across wood came next, a single slide that did not end in a step. I lay on the floor and watched the bottom of the door for light and shadow. Nothing slid under the crack. Nothing moved. Minutes stretched. I whispered the multiplication table to keep my mind inside a grid. Somewhere in that recitation, the house relaxed. At dawn, I stood in the yard and looked at my work. The noise lines were still. The buckets under the eaves held clean water. The porch chair left as a marker had not shifted. The mailbox door hung open on purpose. The hedgerow cans lay on their sides. Something had tugged them, but not far. I reset them and added another with a pebble inside for a different tone. I checked the barn lock and slid the bolt. The raccoon had not returned. I thought again about staying a third night. The jars would not last. The cat could be fed a little longer, but that would tie me here. The well tempted me. The radio tempted me. The quiet tempted me most. Quiet is a danger when it loosens the rules that keep a person moving. I felt the weight of that danger in the way my eyes lingered on the chair, the way my hand smoothed the blue tape on the floor as if it were mine. I took the envelope on the counter and turned it over and wrote a longer note for whoever came next. I passed through. The well is good. The stove flue is dirty. Do not burn indoors unless you sweep it. 2 strangers used the pump with care. A man looked for his dog. If you have her, she is called Lucy. Leave water for her. There is a cat in the barn. It hunts mice. Do not close its door tight. I left one jar. Take only what you need. If you take something, leave a note so the next person knows this place is still touched by hands that remember courtesy. I set the note under a stone on the cellar shelf beside the single jar. Before I left, I walked the upstairs rooms one more time and returned what I could to how I found it. I replaced the hairbrush on the dresser with its bristles pointing the same way as the dust line. I folded the quilt edges flat. I set the stuffed animals back on the shelf in their row. In the bathroom, I placed the bucket with the lid sealed and wrote "Ash" in pencil on the top so no one would open it expecting food. I took the peanut butter, the sewing kit, the thermometer, the matches, 2 candles, a coil of wire, the repaired radio, and 1 towel. I left 3 nails in the drawer, as if they had always been there. At the porch, I checked the street once more. The air felt light again, washed clear from the storm. No smoke in the distance, no sound of trucks, just a crow again, this time perched on the mailbox, head cocked. I told the house thank you, in a low voice no one else would hear, out of respect for the people who had eaten here and laughed here and argued about little things at this table. I do not ask the dead to help me. I do not ask for protection. I note that someone built walls that still stand, and that the well still gives water when a human hand works the handle. That is enough blessing for a day. At the Maples, I checked the cart. The tarp was in place, the straps snug, the wheels free of weeds. I tied the repaired radio to the top where I could reach it without stopping, and tucked the thermometer into a sock to keep it from cracking. I set my route east along the fence line, where the path flattened, and the grass would hide my prints. I paused once and looked back. The porch swing hung quiet. The cat slipped from under the barn and looked at me, then turned away toward a patch of sun. I moved along the fence, listening for the Cantab song one last time. It stayed quiet. At the bend, I left the road and cut through the stubble to avoid the hill where sound travels. The sky was clean, the air still. A single hawk turned tight circles over the far field. I did not watch it long. I kept walking, counting my steps, scanning near, scanning far, keeping the farmhouse in my memory as a place marked by cold water, a clean bucket, a cat in the loft, 2 strangers who respected a boundary, and a man searching for a dog named Lucy. I stopped at the hedgerow gap where I had strung the tab line and reached up to unhook it. I coiled the fishing line into a neat loop and tucked the tabs into my pocket. Metal can be used more than once. I left the coffee lid and the saw blade where they were for the next person. I turned my head to listen one more time for any sign that this leaving would cost me. Nothing carried on the air but the small sounds of the day. As I walked, I tuned the radio with my thumb. The crank turned under my other hand, a steady rhythm I could keep without looking. After a minute, the same murmur rose. Then a voice surfaced for a breath and vanished. A second later, it returned. The words were thin and distorted, but clear enough. Station 17, emergency, repeat, Station 17. The signal cut, then returned with a weather report from months ago, then died to static. I laughed once through my nose. Brief, not joy, not mockery. It meant someone had been speaking within reach of a broken piece of wire and a crank. That meant the map of my next days would hold a point called 17 that I could walk toward, cautiously, not in a straight line, never in a straight line. By mid-morning, the farmhouse shrank to a square, and then a smudge, and then a place I knew was there because I had slept inside it and worked the pump and listened to rain on its roof. I kept moving. I passed a pasture with a rusted gate, a low creek that smelled clean, and a billboard for a farm stand that would never open again. I ate a piece of jerky and a cracker and saved the rest for later. The road curved to the left, and I took the ditch instead, eyes on the points where shade meets light and movement stands out. When the sun leaned, I looked for the next holdfast. Not a house this time. Houses hold stories and echo too much. A culvert with both ends clear. A shed that could be propped. A hollow under a bridge where the concrete still holds the day's heat at dusk. I chose the culvert. I checked both mouths, swept them with the mirror, and set the cart at the far end with the wheels wedged. I hung a small line across the opening from a bush to a root and dangled a washer from it. If it moved, the washer would hit rock. I sat with my back against the concrete and tuned the radio again. The murmur came and went. Once the voice at 17 cut in and said a single word I could not catch. I let it go. The day had used what it needed from my head. I let the culvert hold the rest. I ate 3 spoonfuls of peanut butter and sipped water. I watched the light on the gravel outside my hide shift from white to yellow to plain gray. I pulled the coat over my lap and closed my eyes. The farmhouse existed behind me in a neat place. In front of me, a number glowed in pencil on the back of a small radio. Between them was the road that wanted more of the same careful attention I had paid today. I could give it that. I settled my jaw and adjusted the pack as a pillow and let the culvert fill with night without apology. At some point, a soft tread touched the washer line and made it tick against stone with a small metallic kiss. I did not jerk. I slid my hand to the handgun and laid it flat. I did not need to use it. The tread moved past, slow, uncertain, a single walker slipping along the ditch wall, more interested in the scent of mud than the faint human trace under the bridge. I kept still until the sound dissolved in the larger quiet of the night. I slept in pieces and woke in pieces and surpassed the need to name them. When morning came, I pulled the washer line, coiled it, shouldered the pack, and rolled the cart back onto the gravel. The day held clear and cool. I checked the sky, checked the ditch, checked the open field where I would cross to avoid a bend with houses. The farmhouse became a story I could tell if someone asked for a place to find clean water, a cat that hunts mice, and a porch safe enough to sit on in a storm if a person knows how to tie a rope and listen to a bell. I walked east and thought of Lucy, a dog with a spot over her eye, moving through the same fields 3 ridgelines over, reading the world through scent and habit, smart enough to find a barn and a bowl and a quiet man with a steady hand. I thought of the 2 strangers who kept their voices low and their hands outside the door. I thought of the note in the cellar and the single jar left for someone who needed it more than I did. The world I move through is broken, but it answers to actions that make sense. And a day spent inside sense is a day that does not get you killed. I kept on, step after step, counting fence posts, listening for wind over cornstalks, tuning the radio every mile, and letting the road draw a thin line that I could hold with care. I did not look back again. I did not need to. The farmhouse had done its job. Now it was time for the next.